A morning arrives with the patient clockwork of a city waking up around me. The air carries the faint scent of rain that fell somewhere else, and the light feels like a pale thread laid across a room already half closed to the world. I stand by a window and let the quiet pull at the edges of my thoughts. The quiet is a kind of solvent, dissolving noise until only what matters remains. The shape of a choice, the texture of a decision, the weight of a memory stubborn enough to resist time. They damaged you intentionally. The thought doesn't arrive as a shout. It slides in like a blade of wind through a crack, noticed but not yet acknowledged. The phrase is simple, almost clinical in its accuracy, and yet it carries a gravity that fills the room. I did not wake up one morning and decide to write a manifesto about grudges. The ledger of my days is already heavy with the costs of the past, the friendships I trusted, the promises I believed would outlive spring, the signals I mistook for loyalty. And then came the moment when I felt the difference between being hurt by circumstance and being targeted by intention. The latter is more precise, more deliberate, more intentional in its cruelty. Stoicism does not pretend that harm is rare or that betrayal is gentle. It teaches, rather, that what matters is not the harm itself, but our displacement of ourselves in response to it. It teaches that the good and the bad of a situation are not in the events themselves, but in our judgments about them. They hurt me because I allowed the act to rewrite the environment around me. They harmed me because I gave their action a significance it did not earn through the world's own necessities. They harmed me because I, for a time, believed the future would be shared in the same currency of trust that we once spent so freely. The first lesson is to separate the action from the person. The act of harming, if we are to use the word honestly, is not a complete map of a person. People are a tangle of motives, fear, needs, errors, and alignments with whatever is uncertain in the world. Some people will hurt others intentionally, some will hurt out of weakness, grief, or confusion. To condemn the entire person because of one weighty act is to mistake a shadow for the sun. But there is a crucial distinction within the Stoic mind. A person can keep harming even after you've set healthy boundaries, and the right response is not automatic mercy, but the deliberate maintenance of your own virtue. Virtue is not a subsidy paid to those who disappoint you. Virtue is the oxygen of your own life, and in its presence you govern what you tolerate and what you reject. The memory of the incident arrives as if it had been waiting behind a door, and when I turn the handle, it spills forward with a calculated pace. It is not a single wound, but a chorus of petty and large offenses, each one like a note in a song that refuses to end. A lie whispered to cut me off from a common circle, a planned narrative designed to diminish my standing, a calculated misrepresentation meant to seed doubt where trust had taken root. They did this with intent, not by accident, not by a moment's weakness, but with an eye toward a specific outcome. To unsettle me, to fracture the bonds that kept me anchored in a reality where I could breathe with a measure of certainty. In the face of such deliberate harm, a Stoic turns inward first, toward what can be controlled. The world loves to muddle the idea of control with the fantasy that it somehow makes the universe our personal stage. If only we could bend people to our will, or bend time to erase an offensive moment, or bend outcomes to match the maps we draw in advance. But the only thing fully within a person's control is internal response, the choice of belief, the discipline of attention, the posture of endurance in the face of unjust act, and the decision to reframe what counts as consequential in a life that must continue. So I practice a simple, stubborn discipline. I observe the impulse to retaliate, to demand a second chance as if the past could be rewritten by a louder demand, and I let it sit like a stone in the palm, uncrushed. The practice is not indulgence, it is maintenance. It is not reconciliation with the offender, it is the preservation of a life that would be eroded if I allowed the memory to commandeer every present moment. The second chance premise, maybe they will change, maybe they will understand, maybe the past will become edible again, are less tested against the clock of reality and the weight of evidence. The evidence in this case is clear. The harm was intentional and persistent enough to cross lines that respectable friendship or workable collaboration do not cross back. There is a practical philosophy to this decision, of course. It is not an impulse born of pride or a desire for drama, but a calculated posture in which I respect my own boundaries more than I respect the comfort of an old but broken pattern. The boundary is not a rough wall meant to punish. It is a boundary like a coastline, defined by tides and weather and the shape of a shore that holds firm against the sea. If a person has repeatedly proven that the shore is not a safe harbor for my best self, the wise thing is to move the horizon. If the person has learned nothing from the consequence of their actions, if they see a second chance as an opportunity to repeat the play with different props, then the choice to withhold forgiveness becomes not an act of vengeance, but a commitment to a more serene, more just life. A key idea in Stoicism, and one I return to when the mind grows restless, is to distinguish between what a human being can know and what a human being can control. The mind can control its judgments, the mind cannot compel another's intentions. The offender's motives lie beyond the boundary of my power. The consequences of their choices, however, are not. I decide how much of my time, energy, and trust I will invest in a person who has proven unworthy of them. If I lend myself again to their company, I lend the best of myself to a dynamic that has already demonstrated it cannot preserve my peace without cost. The decision to not grant a second chance is not cruel, it is a maintenance of order, a grammatical correction in the sentence of my life. There is in this stance a paradox that the Stoics would nod at with quiet approval. To part ways with someone who damaged you intentionally can feel like turning away from a form of love, the kind of care that grows out of shared history and mutual vulnerability. It can feel cold to dismiss a relationship that once had warmth. Yet the Stoic answer is not to deny affection, but to elevate it. The highest form of care is care for one's own virtue and for the truth of one's own life. If a relationship undermines that truth, love must be redefined not as attachment at any cost, but as fidelity to the best version of oneself. To hold on to a relationship that corrodes one's virtue is to betray love itself. In the quiet hours, I consider what it would mean to extend a second chance, what it would cost me in the years to come, what it would cost the person who harmed me to admit responsibility, and what it would cost the integrity of my own narrative if I allowed past cruelty to become a recurring theme. This is not a wholesale rejection of mercy, it is a refusal to make mercy a vehicle for ongoing harm. Mercy is a virtue when it is offered to a person who has earned it by a change in character, by a demonstration of intention, by a restoration of trust that aligns with truth. Mercy is not a weapon to be policed by the fear of loneliness or the need for external validation. If mercy ceases to be mercy and becomes a mechanism of self-destruction, then it ceases to be mercy at all. There is a voice in me that wants to understand, to analyze, to map out every motive and mechanism behind the harm. The Stoic response would praise that impulse because it is the seed of wisdom, a form of mind training that helps prevent similar misjudgments in the future. But the same voice warns that attention to motive can become a trap if it becomes a hobby sustained by resentment. We do not live in a film where every actor's intent is legible and every scene can be replayed and corrected. Real life presents us with people who act for reasons we do not wholly know, or sometimes for reasons we do know but cannot morally justify. In such cases, the best use of inquiry is not to serve revenge but to secure prudence for the future. How to choose companions, how to set boundaries, how to protect the inner temple of one's own mind from perpetual invasion by others' agendas. A practical technique helps me keep the compass true. Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of misfortune, is not a gloom-ridden exercise in pessimism. It is a rehearsal of possible outcomes so that I am not blindsided and so that my actions when the moment arrives are true to virtue rather than reflexive. I imagine the worst-case scenario. The person doubles down on their harm, they escalate, they manipulate a new circle to shape perceptions, they demand an explanation I cannot offer without betraying my own standards. I picture myself standing firm, not to punish but to preserve. I picture saying calmly and clearly that I will not reopen the terms of a relationship built on deception or manipulation. I picture walking away from meetings, from conversations that carry the old weight, from any situation in which the memory of their deliberate damage might erode my equanimity. In such mental rehearsals, the mind finds a way to translate the abstract virtue of not giving a second chance into a living practice. It becomes a habit of choosing the present moment as the stage on which my character acts. It becomes a habit of noticing when old patterns tug at me, the old desire to rationalize, to hope against hope that a change in the other person might occur, to tell myself stories in which reconciliation is not only possible but inevitable. The Stoic discipline is to interrupt those stories with a counterstory grounded in what is known and what can be controlled. I am the steward of my choices. I am responsible for my reactions. I owe no one the right to dismantle my peace again and again. There is a persuasive voice that asks, almost tenderly, whether my stance is too severe, whether it borders on cynicism, whether I risk becoming a person hardened beyond empathy. The response comes with the firmness of a stone set in a river. Empathy must be earned and sustained. It does not demand constant access to my inner life. If the other person has chosen to abuse trust as a tactic, then my decision to withhold a second chance does not close the door to growth in them. It closes a chapter in which I am complicit in their harm by enabling their behavior. Growth is possible only in a climate of accountability and truth. A second chance, offered without genuine repentance, is a misdirection. It confuses kindness with a license to continue injuring, and that is not kindness but complicity. The body, too, participates in the judgment. The posture of the shoulders, the cadence of the breath, the way the jaw tightens in memory, all these signs reveal the inner weather. The muscle memory of injury can become a kind of fossil in the tissue of daily life. To refuse to become the future's perpetual victim, I train attention to the present, to what is good, to what is within reach, to the work of living with integrity in the face of injury. When the mind tells a story that the only path to healing is to grant a second chance, I anchor the mind to a more ancient truism. Virtue is not a means to an absence of pain, but a practice that shapes the pain into something that does not have the last word. The decision to not give a second chance is also a political act, if we are honest about the social fabric in which personal ties unfold. It is a statement about the kinds of communities we refuse to sustain, partners who weaponize trust, colleagues who weaponize information, friends who weaponize shared history to bend others to their will. The world is crowded with accounts that muddy the line between forgiveness and protection of the self. My stance is a posture of discernment. When harm is deliberate, repeated, and designed to fracture what is essential in me, I lean toward separation as the act that preserves both wisdom and goodness. This is not vengeance, it is boundary setting. Boundaries are not walls to trap the heart, they are lines that allow the heart to remain open to what is good and trustworthy, untainted by what is not. The narrative I tell myself is not a sermon about coldness, but a map toward a freer life. If I remain in proximity to someone who damaged me intentionally, I risk becoming a shadow of the person I wish to be. The life I want to lead requires a different geometry, smaller circles of trust, greater clarity of purpose, a daily discipline of choosing virtue over convenience. The Stoics teach that life's tranquility is earned, not granted by the mercy of others. If mercy is deserved, it is deserved by the transformation of the other person, not by a ready-made concession given regardless of evidence. And if mercy is withheld, it is not a punishment but a rational safeguard for a life that must endure beyond a single act. There is a moment when memory makes one last attempt to squeeze through the door, a call, a message, a reminder of the old closeness that is now part of a different calendar. In those moments I practice a simple, stubborn ritual. I observe the emotion, and then I release it, not by fusing to the impulse but by naming it, acknowledging it, and returning to the present task at hand. The task, in this instance, is not to punish but to live with a clear conscience. The memory may return again and again, like a tide that never fully leaves the shore. Each time it returns, I meet it with the same posture. Quiet, unhurried, and unwavering in the belief that my life is not a negotiation with the past but a project carved out of virtue in the present. I do not pretend the pain vanishes. The hurt remains as a scar painted into the skin of memory. Scar tissue is not a badge of shame but a map of survival. It marks where I learned to breathe when the room spun, where I learned to speak only when my voice could be the voice of truth, where I learned that the most courageous act in any relationship might be to end it for the sake of what the relationship was supposed to stand for, the protection of a good and noble life, not the continuation of something that has proven itself corrosive. The decision is not a victory lap nor a final judgment. It is a commitment to a way of living, one where the self is honored, where the truth is not bent to soothe others' fantasies, and where boundaries are respected as an expression of care for the life we are building. If you ask me whether I hate them, I would say that hate is not the currency with which I would pay for my peace. If you ask me whether I hope for their downfall, I would answer with a gentler truth. I hope only that they find the clarity to see how their actions affect others, that they learn the art of living with intention rather than with fault-finding, that they grow toward a version of themselves that does not require injury to feel seen, but that growth belongs to them, not to me. My growth belongs to me. It is in the daily decisions to keep my circle of trust intact, to invest my energy in people who have earned it, to cultivate a life whose rhythm is set by virtue rather than by revenge. The choice to not grant a second chance, then, is the choice to align the life I live with the truth I say I believe, to be the sort of person who does not mistake pain for a reason, to suspend the integrity of one's own character. The morning passes, and the city outside begins its ordinary bustle, the clatter of a street vendor, the distant hum of traffic, a bird somewhere repeating an old simple song. I take a breath that feels longer than usual, as if the air itself is lending me a moment to consider the implications of what I have decided and what I still must decide. Not all decisions carry the same weight, but this one does. A decision about how I carry myself into the future, about how I measure the claims of the past against the requirements of a future I still have the power to shape. And so I do what the Stoics advise, not with bravado but with fidelity. I choose to preserve my peace by refusing to allow another person's deliberate harm to redefine my life's terms. I choose the hard kindness of a boundary that is honest, that is just, and that honors the memory of what once was, while protecting what must remain in place for what is to come. I choose to move forward, not by erasing the harm, but by placing it within the larger frame of a life governed by virtue and discernment. If I am asked to articulate the rule I have adopted, it would be this: do not grant a second chance to someone who has proven they cannot respect your boundaries, not because you hate them, but because you love something more than you love the old pattern. Your own life lived with integrity, your own mind free from the recurring intrusion of a harm that has already proven its point. The shield that guards this truth is not vengeful, it is clear-eyed. But because you love something more than you love the old pattern, your own life lived with integrity, your own mind free from the recurring intrusion of a harm that has already proven its point. A shield that guards this truth is not vengeful, it is clear-eyed. The compromise it demands is not to forget, but to remember in a way that does not permit the past to steal the present. And so, with the day unfolding and the memory settled into its proper place, I sit with the decision as with a book that has finally found its spine. The chapters ahead are unwritten, and the future remains in my hands. Not as a weapon, but as a responsibility. The choice to not give them a second chance is not a line drawn in anger, but a line drawn in virtue. A line that says, I will not trade the health of my life for the reassurance of a version of you that you are not willing to become. This is the stance I return to when the mind begins its old familiar whisper. Perhaps there is a version of reconciliation that does not demand my renunciation of what I know to be true. The answer does not reside in the whisper, but in the action I take when the whisper becomes a loud thought. And the action is simple, unromantic, and precise. I preserve the conditions of my peace I hold to the boundary. If this is harsh, then let it be harsh in service of the kinder truth that a life well lived is a life guarded against repeat injuries and guided by a steadfast, unyielding fidelity to virtue. The day closes with a quiet certainty. The memory remains, but its pull weakens. The heart, trained by years of practice, finds its rhythm again in the ordinary tempo of daily life. I carry on, not as someone who denies what happened, but as someone who has learned to arrange the world so that what happened does not undo what I can still become. The vow is spoken in the present tense, not as a threat to others, but as a pledge to myself, to live in a way that honors virtue, to choose distance when closeness would only repeat the same harm, and to let the memory stand as testimony to a boundary wisely chosen, not as a weapon of ongoing grievance. The first day of the rest of my life does not arrive with fanfare. It arrives as a quiet, persistent commitment to a truth I refuse to betray, that a second chance, when deserved and earned, is a generous gift. When it is not deserved, the gift is withheld, not out of cruelty, but out of care for the life that remains intact, and for the possibility that others too can learn the art of choosing rightly under pressure. I do not celebrate a victory over another, I celebrate a victory over a failure to protect what is most sacred, the dignity of a life lived with purpose. If you were to trace the path of this decision, you would find it in the daily choices that follow, the way I respond to a reminder of the past, the manner in which I choose whom to trust, the discipline with which I pursue work, friendship, and growth without inviting old wounds to be reopened. The not giving a second chance stance becomes not a closing of the heart, but a refinement of its focus. It is what the Stoics would call keeping the soul aligned with its true good, with the good that does not bend to the whims of others, but stands firm to protect the one life that cannot be replaced. And so I begin again, not by erasing what happened, not by erasing the person, but by choosing the path that preserves the life in front of me, while acknowledging the hurt that cannot be erased. The choice is exactly what it was when the harm was first perceived, clear, difficult, necessary, and true. It is not a rebuke to those who harmed me, but a declaration to the self I am becoming, that the future I will inhabit will be earned, one day at a time, with my own decisions as the only currency that matters. The day closes with a sense of quiet resolution. The memory lingers, yes, but it no longer commands the stage. The room around me holds steady in its ordinary light. The decision to withhold a second chance remains the compass by which I navigate toward a life that is not perfect but is good and true. If there are questions to be asked in the hours ahead, let them be questions of how to protect what is essential, how to choose what is right, how to live with the courage to let go of what cannot bear the weight of my wholeness. And if there is mercy to be extended in the future, may it arise not from a reaction to pain, but from a discipline sharpened by it, the mercy of a life that chooses virtue over dwelling in a past that has already shown its cost. This is the core of the stance, to not give them a second chance, because they damaged you intentionally. It is the Stoic way, not to punish, not to forget, but to preserve the integrity of your own life, to keep your inner house clean, and to walk forward with the quiet certainty that virtue does not need the approval of every offender to remain intact. The path ahead is yours to walk, and you walk it with a steady breath, a steady heart, and a steady mind that knows what is worth saving and what is not. What remains is to keep walking. The road is long, the weather uncertain, and the memories will still come at intervals, but they will come as parts of a larger whole, the ongoing work of living well, one choice at a time. The decision stands, unshaken. They harmed you on purpose, and your response is a disciplined, compassionate, unyielding commitment to your own good. If the world asks for more, you give it your best, steady, clear, and true. Perhaps someday the wounds will scar over into something less sharp, or perhaps they will remain a reminder of a boundary once drawn with care and courage. Either way, you will have chosen virtue over vengeance, and that choice is enough to carry you forward. If there is a final thought to carry into the night, it is this: the life of a person who has suffered intentional harm can be rebuilt, not by erasing the harm, but by choosing the form of the person you will become as a result of living with what you know to be true. The decision to withhold a second chance is not a rejection of humanity, but a sober defense of your own humanity. It is enough for today to have chosen rightly, and the rest will follow as the days unfold. Now the night comes, softly and without fanfare. The room grows quiet again. The memory rests, not away, but within its proper place, enclosed and contained, a lesson learned, a boundary kept, a life preserved. The day ends with a sense of quiet resolve. I will continue to walk this road, not as a seeker of revenge, but as a craftsman of virtue, shaping each moment into something sturdy, true, and good.